The Chicago Bears are one of the most interesting teams heading into the 2023 season. They've been really bad, but at the very least, the roster is a lot better. The single most important thing this year is continuing to develop Justin Fields. Now, he showed some flashes last season, and Chicago has certainly worked to build around him. Fields is going to have the best weapons around him as a pro, and the Bears were able to use the NFL draft to really improve the team for him. A lot of talk around the Chicago Bears this offseason has been more centered around the NFL draft. Now, usually, that's what happens when you're looking to draft a quarterback, but that wasn't the case. Chicago was bad enough to get the first overall pick, and not needing a quarterback made it easy to trade that selection away to the highest bidder, which ended up being the Panthers. Carolina gave up a haul. Chicago got the Panthers' first rounder, a first in 2024, their second, and a 2025 second. The Bears didn't actually end up picking at 9 or 61, which is originally where the traded picks were. Chicago ended up trading back from 9 to 10 to get an extra fourth from the Eagles. Then the Bears took an offensive lineman, Darnell Wright. Now, he was a stud at Tennessee, and he's coming off of a season where he was first team All-SEC and started every game at right tackle. The year before, he started every game at left tackle. As a sophomore in 2020, he started in almost every game at right tackle, and as a freshman, he was actually named to the freshman All-SEC team after he started a bit at right tackle and right guard. Then, with that second rounder, the Bears ended up trading up to get Tyrique Stevenson, a cornerback out of Miami. So, looking back, they were sort of part of that deal for the first overall pick, but that wasn't all either. The Bears also got DJ Moore in the trade. He is an experienced wide receiver who was drafted by the Panthers back in 2018. He was consistently good for a 3-year stretch with over 1,100 yards and 4 touchdowns each season. The Bears knew they needed a number 1 wideout for Justin Fields, and that's exactly what that trade was all about. And now looking forward, the single most important thing this season is Justin Fields. Justin Fields showed some much needed improvement last season. He was better in the passing game, even if it wasn't anything crazy. He didn't light anything on fire, but he was okay. He did only complete 60.4% of his throws with 2,242 yards and 17 touchdowns to 11 interceptions. But if you watch the Bears and you watch Justin Fields, you know where he really did flash, and that was on the ground. He rushed 160 times for 1,143 yards and 8 touchdowns. He did most of his damage on the ground. Sometimes he was running more than he was throwing. Fields rushed for over 100 yards 3 times. His best outing was in week 9 against the Dolphins. Fields ended up rushing for 178 yards and a touchdown while throwing for 123 yards and 3 touchdowns. His touchdowns were coming through the air. Meanwhile, he was still carving defenses to move the ball downfield. A true dual threat quarterback. Then the next week, he rushed for 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, threw for 167 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he did also have a pick. He kind of did everything that game. He was getting it done through the air, and then he'd get it done with his legs too. Very impressive. That ended up being the Bears' first matchup against Detroit. Then in week 17, they played again, and Fields ended up struggling through the air. He only completed a third of his throws for just 75 yards with a touchdown and an interception, but he did still make an impact on the ground with 132 yards. So even when he wasn't productive through the air, he still had that threat of running the football. Still, even with his improvements, the Bears sucked. They lost all 3 of those games I just mentioned, and they went 3-12 in Fields starts. And he did miss 2 games due to injury. Fields hasn't had much luck winning in the pros so far. As a rookie, he went 2-8. Again, he missed some time. Fields didn't play in 5 games. He suffered a rib fracture, he dealt with an ankle injury, and he got COVID. He definitely struggled as a rookie. Fields was pretty bad in his first start. In week 3, he only completed 6 of 20 passes for 68 yards. Week 7 was probably his worst game of the year, and maybe the worst of his career so far, when he threw 3 picks. There were some times where he also did show some flashes, though. The week after after that rough 3-interception game, well, he came out and he threw for 175 yards and had a touchdown and an interception, but we finally really got to see what Fields could do on the ground. He rushed for over 100 yards and scored. Now, overall, it was a bad rookie season, but he showed promise. He finished the year with about 1,800 yards and 7 touchdowns to 10 interceptions with just a 58.9 completion percentage. Rushing, Fields took off 72 times for 420 yards and 2 touchdowns. There's still a very long way to go for Justin Fields, but the Bears took him 11th at the 2021 draft for a reason. The raw talent is there. He just needs to continue to develop, and Chicago needs to keep building around him. DJ Moore is now the very, very clear number 1 wide receiver in Chicago after they traded for him. But what do Justin Fields' weapons look like after him? The passing game sucked last year. Only 2 Bears were actually near 500 yards receiving, and the only one that passed that mark was Cole Kmet, a tight end. He had 544 yards, 50 receptions, and 7 touchdowns, all of which were actually team highs. Darnell Mooney came 7 yards short of 500. He had 40 catches and scored 2 touchdowns. Now, it's worth noting here, surely his numbers would have been a lot better if he would have been healthy all season. Now, the number 3 listed for the Bears is Chase Claypool, which is kind of a touchy subject depending on who you talk to. He definitely didn't have the best tenure in Chicago last year. The Bears traded their second for Claypool, and Claypool had over 800 yards in each of his first 2 seasons in Pittsburgh. In his first 8 games of the 2022 season, he had over 300 yards. After the Steelers traded him, well, he had just 140 yards and didn't score for the rest of the year. The trade looks terrible now, but there is time to right the ship. After all, the Bears were a very run-heavy team in 2022. Fields was a 1,000-yard rusher, like I mentioned, but Chicago also had 2 running backs with over 700 yards, David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert. Montgomery left for Detroit, but Herbert is back. He was a dog in college at Virginia Tech, and he was my favorite player when I was in college there. Herbert is explosive as hell and has great vision, and he's been able to prove that in the pros with back-to-back 800-yard seasons. Chicago also signed Donta Foreman this offseason. He's coming off of a career-best year with over 900 yards and 5 touchdowns in Carolina. The Bears have some playmakers, but if there's a single unit I'm most excited for, it might actually be offensive line. They drafted Darnell Wright, and he'll probably play right tackle. Left tackle Braxton Jones will get another year under his belt after a good rookie season. Tevin Jenkins was actually the Bears' best offensive lineman in 2022. Now, he was essentially a bust, but was moved to guard and was great on the right side of the line last season. Center Cody Whitehair is back, and the Bears signed guard Nate Davis to a 3-year, $30 million deal. It should be a solid unit and maybe the single biggest piece to the development of Justin Fields. The Bears were busy this offseason, and more than anything, on defense, they completely revamped their linebacker core. Chicago traded Roquan Smith during last season, and that left a massive hole at the position. The Bears filled it by throwing a lot of money out during free agency. The big signing was Tremaine Edmunds, another former Hokie. He was good with the Bills, and he cashed in Chicago on a 4-year, $72 million deal. The Bears also signed TJ Edwards to a 3-year, $19.5 million contract. He was a staple at linebacker for the Eagles and is coming off of the best year of his career with 159 tackles. Now, above the linebackers, the Bears defense gets even better, arguably. Jalen Johnson is a good corner, and I think he's really underrated. The 2 other main guys are young, though. Kyler Gordon is entering his 2nd season in the pros, so hopefully he can improve and be a good guy there in the slot. And of course, they just drafted Tyreek Stevenson too. Safety is probably the best unit on the team if I had to pick. Eddie Jackson has been a cornerstone for a minute, and Jaquan Brisker was just great as a rookie. Now, the Bears defense was terrible last year. It was one of the worst in the league, and the biggest reason why was really the defensive line. The edge rushers are okay at best. It's still a terrible position group. The interior of the line was bad too, but the Bears did make that a focal point point at the draft. They used a second on Gervon Dexter and a third on Zach Pickens. At the very least, the Bears defense should be better this season, but that's not saying much. The Chicago Bears are going to be better this season, but how much better? The roster has improved, and Justin Fields should keep developing. The Bears have made it a big thing to get the right pieces around him. I still don't expect Chicago to be great. I think they're still a year or two out from being good, but they're heading in the right direction, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. The Chicago Bears may not be a good team, but their time could be coming.